So this postulate defines radiogenesis. Radio refers to the information-bearing capacity of light and all spectral radiant energy. Genesis, to the capacity of light to transform itself into the palpably plasmic and mobile phenomenon called life. From the perspective of the Mayan factor, the relation between light and life is not a linear, casual one, i.e., first there is light, then there is life, but one in which life is embedded in a matrix of radiant energy possibilities. This is literally depicted in the Tzolk'in, where the 64 units representing the DNA code occupy the central grid corresponding to the 32 units on either side of the mystic column, accommodating the loom of Maya in its crossover pattern. And that is how a bumblebee flies. That center column right there is what allows them to access the toroidal flow within them, and that's what they're speaking of. So first there is light, then there is life, but one in which life is embedded in a matrix of radiant energetic possibilities. This is depicted in the DNA code 64 units represent the DNA code occupy the central grid corresponding to the 32 units, as I said before. Let us assume that the remaining units around the central 64 grid represent stages of light and radiant energy unfoldment that simultaneously precede, follow, and at the same time interpenetrate the evolution of DNA. What? Since the 64 unit game board of DNA is contained within the larger radiogenic game board of the Tzolk'in, we may consider that DNA itself is a bridge from one domain of light or radiant energy to another. By fractal analogy, the stage called history, through technological acceleration, mimics this function of DNA as a link between two radiant realms. In the radiogenic proposition, the term history represents the intensification of the capacity of DNA to artificially or technologically bridge and hence leap from one level of radiant symbolic understanding and fulfillment, prehistory, to another, post-history, allowing fractal harmonics their full play. The stage of accelerating technological leapfrog can be plotted within the 64 central units of the Tzolk'in, the whole of which is understood as a representation of the entire radiogenic game board. During passage through the 5200 tune beam, it is as if the technology extruding DNA is completing a circuit through the 64 central units of the game board, though it's not apparent until the circuit is complete. Once the 64 units have been traversed, the whole game board, let us say, lights up. The lighting up of the game board refers to the final circuit completing synchronization of DNA, corresponding to the date 2012, 13.0.0.0.0, enter post-history. A further distinction between the technological middle and the pre- and post phases of the distinction between myth and history, understood as qualitative conditions of consciousness. Myth defines the capacity for simultaneous multi-referential resonance that merges being with being. History is the tendency to limit, measure, and materialize in a uni-referential direction that separates being from being. From the perspective of myth, the rays of light slanting through the leaves in the forest are the nourishing fingers of the dawn, bring solar morsels to our waiting cells. A response to the light in the form of a chant and an offering of smoke from a circle of stones, inviting the presence of ancestor beings and the great ones who guide all things, completes the experience. I'm going to read that again. A response to the light in the form of a chant an offering of smoke from a circle of stones, inviting the presence of ancestor beings and the great ones who guide all things, completes the experience. To the historic consciousness, in contrast, the light slanting through the trees, though representing a mystery to some, tells us that another day has arrived, and depending on our needs and interests, whether or not we will need a coat and a hat, or whether or not it will be a good day for sunbathing. In other words, the mythic condition constructs from the experience a sacrament of ritual that affirms the bond between light and the greater forces, ultimately the forces of light. The historic mind uses the experience as information that determines practical creature comfort goals. However, the creature comfort seeking aspect of historic consciousness is in actuality the feedback effect of the impulse of DNA to extrude technology. Hence, historic consciousness is but a byproduct of the larger technological bridging process, moving us from one natural symbiosis to another, from one realm of light to another. So we arrive at the moment when technology becomes transformation. This is initially experienced as a crisis to which the dominant paradigm power holders are blinded. Though the present scientifically materialistic power holders believe that the world is the way it is because they have made it so, in actuality they are playing out roles specified by the harmonic wave phase of which the present era is a function. The belief they hold about the world, the dominant belief subscribed to and accepted by the governing institutions of the present world order, define the prevailing paradigm. Belief is this paradigm. The scientific materialistic worldview can be described as a mental house. As we saw in Chapter 6, the foundations of the current mental house were laid in the 17th century during the initial cantunes of the 12th Baktun. By 1756, the walls of the mental house, belief in technological progress, and industrial democracy began to be erected. Between 1874 and 1953, the electromagnetic roof of the current mental house was emplaced. EMPLACED. Finally, between 1953 and the present moment, the era of the launching of humankind and its artificial sensory intelligence probes into, quote, outer space, the mental house began its internal dissolution. In this regard, it should be recalled that the notion of paradigm shift was first introduced by Thomas Kuhn, Kuhn, in 1964. Crystal Earth cross-section, receiving galactic program. Receiving a galactic program might actually be what you're doing with that crystal right now. Okay. Corresponding to this developmental frame in the climax of the counterspin of the Earth resonance, the signal for this climax was first received in 1945 with the detonation of atomic weapons. As a member of the solar galactic order, Earth's response was first manifest in the UFO activity, which by 1947 could no longer be ignored, without denying the psychic validity of the many people who have had encounters of the third kind. Let us here define UFOs as unified field organizers. Let's correct the record now, shall we? An intelligent release of galactically programmed, psychically active, radiant energy simultaneously attracted to and emanated by Earth's resonant etheric body. They are referred to as unified field organizers because they are a manifestation of Earth's intrinsically unified resonant field. Since this field is actually in solar galactic resonance, the UFOs also operate in conjunction with the harmonics of this field. In fact, their, quote, operations are completely a function of resonant harmonics. Thus, the rapid shifts in direction attributed to UFOs are due to shifts in harmonic overtone alignment. Can you say cash? Following the discovery of DNA and the detection of the radiation belts in 1953 and the verification of the tectonic plates in 1964, the internal dissolution of the current mental house had begun. All of these discoveries, DNA, radiation belts, tectonic plates, were necessary for the beginning of understanding of the coming paradigm, the new mental house of the unified, resonant Earth. In the meantime, UFOs continued to accompany the era of massive nuclear testing, and with radar, television, radio, and microwave radiation, the overall electromagnetic field of the planet entered a period of heightened dissonance. The etheric or light body of the planet, intensified by this bombardment, increased its signals through the morphogenic field. In the wake of these signals came renewed interest in psychic phenomenon, UFOs, psychedelic drugs, interspecies communication, and ecology movement. The counter-response of the dissolving mental house was space exploration, the extension of the materialistic acquisitive paradigm into, quote, outer space. The great era of space exploration, the conquest of space, quote unquote, began with the moon landing on July 17, 1969, followed by probes to Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, finally by January 24, 1986, Uranus. Two major inexplicables presented themselves through these probes. The one was the finding of the officially suppressed so-called face of Mars on July 25, 1976. The other, the highly regular markings on the Uranian moon, Miranda, as well as the solar-oriented polar tilt, and incredibly intense and erratic electromagnetic field of Uranus. While these findings presented paradigm-defying enigmas to the frame of the current mental house, space technology itself was still vaunted as the pinnacle of scientific achievement. Thus, it was particularly noteworthy that 4 days following the Voyager flight by Uranus on January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded some 73 seconds following takeoff. While follow-up investigations tried to pinpoint the technological failure contributing to the Challenger's disaster, the next 3 NASA space launchings all exploded just following takeoff. As if that were not enough, the European space launch Ariane also exploded shortly after takeoff. This was all in a period between late January and mid-May 1986. What was going on? In resonance with the shifting foundations of the tectonic plates and oversaturated with electromagnetic dissonance, the roof of the current mental house had literally begun to collapse. Like flies picked off by a child in an impish concentration, the space probes were flicked from their trajectories. For what? The answer is by erratically triggered waves of dissonance set off by unwitting human desire to control and jam the electromagnetic field. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurring April 25th to the 26th, 1986, and the buzzing of the Brazilian Air Force by 13 UFOs on May 23rd, 1986, was 2 further resonant field signals announcing the simultaneous failure and limits of technology and the rapid disintegration of the current mental house. Speaking with the voice of events whose orients and effects escape the modern consciousness, the resonant core of the Earth, attuned to the galactic harmonic, is readying for a harmonic convergence, the point at which the counterspin of history finally comes to a momentary halt. The still imperceptible spin of post-history commences. By the time these words are read publicly, the event, harmonic convergence, will be but a few months away. Other events of a shattering, thought-provoking nature shall have recently occurred, demonstrating that not only the roof, but even the walls of the current mental house are in a shambles. All that will be left is the dissolution of the foundations, the bedrock of scientific materialism that asserts the uniqueness and superiority of man in the universe. Meanwhile, the counter effects of the new mental house, operating through the intensified resonant grid of Earth's light body, for the first time will become manifest as the networked thrust toward a unified moment of collective synchronization, harmonic convergence. Through the transnational grassroots infrastructure of the new mental house and in collaboration with a cooperative global media conglomerate, a radio co-op, increasing numbers of humans are experiencing the reality of the global brain. The action of local collectives, art spores, operating through attunement to the knowledge that purpose is not an individual possession, will, in all actuality, be stringing beads of unified intention upon the planetary grid system. And then it shall occur, harmonic convergence, the exponential acceleration of the wave harmonic of history as it phases into a moment of unprecedented synchronization. Like a shuttle on a loom shifting with lightning-like speed, the resonant frequency of the earth grid will shift. In the shift, the foundations of the mental house, imprinted with the names of Descartes, Newton, Galileo, and Copernicus, will dissolve, rippling ever more deeply through the consciousness of an aroused minority of the human race. What will be the realization of a larger, resonantly attractive force, a super sensible synthesis of mind and nature, hitherto undreamed of, will dawn. The experience of reality as a unifying matrix, a synesthetic blending of the senses brought about through light sign the experience of reality as a unifying matrix, a synesthetic blending of the senses brought about through light sound sensory experience, will provide the first vibratory layers of the foundations of the new mental house. Looks like the inside of a butterfly to me, or a hummingbird, or a double helix pattern loom of Maya, 64 unit crossover polarity zone.
Just so you know, I got like a, so this is negative, this is positive, red, green, like double helix, like spinning like really, really fast, like kind of like a generator thing going on. It's like, I don't keep going.
This is 17 minutes long already. I'm gonna close.